Do we actually know what we're talking about when it comes to careers work in primary schools?
Yes, welcome back to the We Are Careers show with Chris and Sabiha. And as you've just heard there, a very meaty topic for us to be getting stuck into today as we record this during, topically, National Careers Week 2025. So to help us unpick that very kind of thorny, maybe quite controversial question, we're delighted to have with us today James Duncan and Jamie Pywell from MYPATH, who we're going to be coming back to in a second and introducing. But Sabiha, let's just talk really quickly about that question. Primary careers, what's your kind of knowledge? Is this one that you kind of feel pretty expert on already, or is it one that's going to be a bit new to you as well today?
Oh my gosh, no, none whatsoever. This is not an area of my expertise. So I'm so excited that we've got Jamie and James here today who are going to educate us and explore this topic with us. So a very warm welcome to the show. And for any of our new viewers, make sure you hit that subscribe. And if you've enjoyed today's show, make sure you hit that like button. It really does make a difference. And we really appreciate your support when everybody does this for us. Now, I'm going to come to Jamie first. Jamie, tell us a little bit about your background and why you created MyPath. And then I'll come to you, James, second.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me back on the podcast. I know for James, it's the first time on the podcast, but for me, it's a second appearance, thankfully. So yeah, thank you for having me back, first of all. So my background, I worked as a careers leader in a secondary school. After lots of other different jobs throughout my career, I was working as a careers leader. And I absolutely loved that role. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thought it was amazing. I loved being able to build programs around careers, to build employer relationships, and do lots of other stuff as well. I absolutely loved it, and I couldn't see myself really going on to do anything different. I was working in a kind of a deprived area, a school with kind of high free school meals and pupil premium needs. And essentially, we hit COVID, and it all kind of went to pot for me because our students weren't able to access all of the careers resources that were out there. I was being bombarded with amazing, or what I thought to be amazing, opportunities for students. But when I was sharing them out to the students within the school, I just wasn't getting a response, and it felt like the resources that were out there were just either they didn't really fit the purpose. Maybe they were too long, they were too meaty, they were too lengthy. Maybe they were just the wrong format. Maybe it had lots of great information, but was a little bit boring, if we're being honest. It was, some of the stuff was a little bit wordy. You had to read 3,000 words worth of text before you could even access the activity. Maybe there wasn't even an activity. It was just a knowledge-based thing. So I kind of thought during COVID, let me have a go myself and let me see what I can do to make it a little bit better for the students in the school I was in. And I started creating some short LMI videos, so labour market information videos, kind of 2 minutes long, really short and snappy, bit of kind of hip hop music in the background, and just making it relevant for young people, kind of something you'd expect to see on TikTok or Instagram or on YouTube Shorts or something like that. And quite quickly, that went from something that I was making in my spare time and then sharing with the students in the school I was in, to something that I had lots of schools accessing. And actually, I had lots of inbound messages from schools. So I found within about 3 months of creating the first video, after sharing it with one best practice networking event, I'd had about 1,000 schools contact me and ask for this new format of resources because it was free. There was no business idea there or no model that it was going to become anything else. But people were saying, can we use it? If it's there, can we use it ourselves? So we kind of started a mailing list, and one thing led to another. And we've ended up now in a position where we support over 1/3 of all secondary schools in the UK through the Job of the Week and other free LMI videos. That then went on and developed. So after a little bit of time of me spending my Sundays, usually with a glass of wine in hand, creating a Job of the Week video to share with the community, I had some people reach out about other things. So do you do lessons in this format and assemblies and CPDs and things like that? I also had a business that reached out and said, can we sponsor this? We can see you getting some traction and you're getting quite a big audience. Could we give you some money to put our logo in the corner to help you to develop this further and take it forward? So it was kind of a really organic and natural thing. And since since then, it's developed quite organically and naturally. We hire the content creators to come in and help to support, to create more resources that are kind of aimed specifically at young people, who's amazing. Alex, if he's watching this, is a great content creator for us at MyPath. And then the team's just organically grown. So I'm a careers advisor by trade. I am a careers leader by kind of my history, if you like, my job history. But then I've gone on to create something that was essentially just filling a gap that I needed as a careers leader. So creating resources that were well placed for the students that I was looking after. It's just organically grown with our team. I think we're between 10 and 12, depending on, you know, the freelancers and people that are involved at different times of the year. So we've grown to be a fairly substantial team. And we're doing some really exciting stuff. So yeah, really glad to have the opportunity to speak on this podcast and to have a bit of a platform to get on our soapbox and talk about the stuff that we care about.
Oh, well, Jamie, you're definitely going to get a chance to get on your soapbox. And I love how you describe how a glass of wine on a Sunday evening has literally created MyPath. So I want to bring James in. So, James, we'd heard from Jamie of what sort of kind of got him into this. How about you? What's your background? What's your story? What's got you involved in MyPath?
It's actually not as impressive. But Jamie and I have been friends for a long time. We did NCS in the summers together, working on NCS. We've had many sleepless nights, many Red Bulls to get us through some of those NCS times. And then our careers went in different paths. I ended up training to become a primary school teacher. I was then teaching in Leicester. I now teach in Nottingham. And, you know, we've just been good friends. So Jamie, I was keeping a keen eye on MyPath, and Jamie was just telling me all about this exciting new research that's coming out around primary careers. And I'm a little bit of a research geek. I love curriculum design, things like that. And he said, I just want you to have a look at this for me. So I had a look, and I was really, really intrigued by primary careers and thought, how can I bring my knowledge of pedagogy, how schools work, and adapt that to primary careers? So now I've been with MyPath for about a year and a half now, developing the primary version of the amazing thing Jamie's talking about. And it's just been brilliant. I think as of like a couple of days ago, we've got 1,800 schools funded our resources for across England, which is amazing. And yeah, I absolutely love it.
James, so we've heard a little bit of background there about how you've kind of got into MyPath, and that sort of links really nicely, I guess, to the big question or the problem statement we asked at the top of the show, which was really around this idea of, do we really know what we're talking about as careers professionals when it comes to primary careers? Now, we've had episodes in the past, people like Lucy Sackler talking about this, who've kind of been quite involved in it. And obviously, as you mentioned, there's been quite a lot of research out on the topic. There are quite a lot of careers professionals who've been talking about this for some time. But I know when we originally met, one thing that came out of the conversation was, do we really know what we're talking about in relation to this part of the career sector? And Jamie, I'm going to come to you first, because I think you've got quite a personal story here that maybe answers that question, I guess. Do we know what we're talking about when it comes to primary?
I mean, I think the really short answer, although I wouldn't want to cut the podcast off here, is no, we don't know what we're talking about as a whole. But I think that, the kind of personal anecdote behind this. So for me, as this research was coming out and more people on LinkedIn and in careers groups and networking events and different things that I've attended or been a part of, different people were talking about primary careers. And the more I looked at the research before James was involved, I was thinking this is something that really needs to happen, and we're quite well placed to create something that will kind of not plug the gap, but kind of give a bit of an opportunity for primary schools to get engaged with careers education. So when I spoke to James, and initially when I first spoke to James, it was as a friend around what my plans were and what my thoughts were. And actually, we sat down and I went over what I thought was going to happen. And essentially what I thought was I'll grab all of my secondary resources, I'll just completely kind of change them, adapt them to make them relevant to the year groups. And that'll be it. So all of our existing things, our enterprise days, that will exist in the same format. It will just be more of a primary focus. Our lessons will be the same lessons, but just for primary. And actually, although it was rather annoying at the time, James looked at me in disbelief because the things that I was talking about were so irrelevant to what's actually happening in primary schools. And one example, which I won't go into a lot because I'll let James talk about it in a minute, is salary. So I was thinking about how we talk about salaries within primary schools, and actually it's completely different to how we might consider it in secondary, which James will explain in a minute. But yeah, so for me, I actually was going to be a person that was going to put out something that would have been, although it would have looked really great and would have been really nice, but based on my own knowledge and my lack of knowledge of primary, it would have been a substandard product. It wouldn't have been fit for purpose. So whilst it would have had loads of careers theory and loads of careers background, and it would have had the MyPath brand all over it, it probably wouldn't have been the right thing to put out. But I think the more we spoke about it, the more important that we realized it was that we actually work together on this to get something that's really appropriate.
Yeah, danger of assumptions, as you say. I think it's kind of one of those things where often, as careers professionals, we're often challenging assumptions, aren't we? But of course, it's always very easy to have your own blind spots. So a really, really interesting point. James, I'll sort of bring you in here now. So, you know, kind of Jamie's alluded there to your role, and I guess that perspective, that lens you had that opened up some of this thinking around primary careers. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about, I guess, where you stepped in here and some of those observations you made.
Yeah, so there's so many factors at play here, and I think throughout this podcast we'll explore a few of them. And I think, you know, from a teacher's perspective, there are concerns around time, resource, all these kind of things. And remember Jamie initially talking about what one of your resources would look like, and then as you said, you talked about salary, and then I was like, we're looking at that from a teacher's perspective. I was thinking, is it worthwhile talking to primary age children about salary? And I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I just think there's a really interesting question to be had there, because from my perspective, we actually don't teach children about 5-digit numbers until they're in year 4. So I think they do, it's like up to 10,000 on a number line in year 4, and then they build on that in year 5 and year 6. So then if the children don't actually understand the place value of those numbers, what's the point in talking to them about like £36,000? Moreover, if they then do understand those numbers, do they have then the context around it to be able to meaningfully deduct if that's a good salary or a bad salary? Or, you know, they might not have that understanding of, you know, so for example, if I said to one of my year 6s, £10,000 salary, they'd be like, "Whoa, Mr. Duncan, that's an incredible amount of money." And it is. It is. You know, £10,000 is a lot of money, but that's not factoring in, you know, the economy and things like that. So that's the one thing that I thought when we work together, we could create, you know, from my perspective as a teacher, but like with your style, your MYPATH, all the things that work, right?
And I think the time thing's interesting as well, like the difference between how a resource sits within the time.
Yeah. So of course, in, you know, with primary, it's important to consider their attention span as well, students, and also where we can fit stuff into the curriculum. You know, spinning so many plates as a teacher, there are just so many considerations. And you know, if you only need to like look into something like cognitive load theory to understand that we can't be bombarding children with knowledge that's just going to go in one ear and out the other. It needs to be meaningful.
Some really great points there that both of you have made, and the reason why I'm smiling is just so recently I was talking to one of my nieces, and she didn't want a £5 note. She wanted coins, because in her mind, she's a 5-year-old, and in her mind the coins are more valuable than a piece of paper, even though the coins were less in value. And it's exactly that point that both of you are making around how do you make this conversation relevant to the audience. And what you're essentially saying is that what you've done is you've managed between you and your team create content that is valuable for the audience. You're thinking about, okay, who are we teaching this to? You know, if it's 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and then making sure that that conversation that is taking place between yourselves, as well as the teachers and the career providers and the careers leaders that are part of this program and this project, you're making sure that it's relevant. Now, one question that I do want to ask is that you've clearly found through the work that you're doing together that there is a collaborative approach between yourselves, educators, and you've mentioned there's some of the reasons why certain professionals wouldn't be interested, educators wouldn't be interested, because they may be time poor, they're burnt out. There's so many other things that are happening within the curriculum. As well, and you're finding creative ways of establishing that. So I guess my question is, based on what you've worked on so far, what would you say are some of the key differences between careers work in primary schools as opposed to secondary school settings? What works? What have you found that works really well in primary careers space?
I think I'll start with the secondary and what's not in primary, and then you can have what's in the primary, because I think that's really important. So I think one thing is, in secondary schools, this is mandated. Careers education in secondary schools is mandated, which means there is significant resource There is, although we are, economically we don't have loads of money throughout it, there is money, there is an expectancy that we're going to spend something on it, whether that's on the provision of work experience or a careers advisor or CDP going in, whether that's for events, whatever it might be. There's an expectancy that schools are probably going to have to foot the bill for something, even if that's an internal member of staff. There's also because it's mandatory and there's things that we have to tick off in order for it to be relevant to Ofsted, and for Ofsted to come and pick apart what we do. There's a priority that's put on this where, to a certain degree, and I know it differs from school to school, some schools and colleges are amazing at this, other schools are still, somewhat further behind. There is some level of priority where we need to get this to happen in some way. So the conversations are very, very different between secondary and primary in that regard. I think what would be good then is to get a primary perspective on that.
Yeah, it's not mandated, right? So I think everybody who's listening to this podcast, already might see the value in primary careers, and we all hope that one day it will be mandated in some regard. But the implications of that at the minute are there's no allocated time. So what that looks like for a teacher is we're all quite similar primary school teachers. We're spinning lots of plates. You've got subject leader hats on, you've got reports to write, you're a jack of all trades as a primary school teacher. And then somebody comes along and goes, hey, on top of all of this, on top of the jam-packed curriculum that you're delivering, now you've got to do careers education. And if, I would just lose my head. And I respect that that's going to be a huge thing for lots of primary school teachers in this country. So there's that kind of cultural element to it as well, that we're really keen on, engaging teachers in careers education meaningfully, whilst there might be that uncertainty. There's also a lack of understanding that goes with that. Some schools have been really, really on board with careers education, and there've just been some wonderful things happen as a result of that. But understandably, some schools are unsure of the benefits. And whilst they don't have the money that they have in secondaries, they don't have the designated time, or maybe just like the unsureness of what does this actually look like, understandably, schools aren't engaging with it as much as they could be.
I think there's also something to be said for like the length of time they're prepared to put into it. So even if a wonderful resource was created, whoever that was from, if there was something that was really easy to access and amazing, if it's an hour long, there just isn't time, because it's not given the priority in primary that it is in secondary. And again, that differs from secondary to secondary. So I think there's a lot of challenges in getting primary careers education to happen. In secondary, I know lots of careers leaders that would be more than happy for me to give them an off-the-shelf solution that will fix problems, because we're trying to get so many things done. And whilst there's an equal or more, I don't want to make that controversial comment around primary or secondary pressures, but it dependent on how you look at it. There's lots going on for careers leaders in secondary schools as well. But the difference is they are responsible for it. There is somebody that's given that title. There's somebody that's championing that cause. To what level they do that is a different story. But that's the really interesting bit, that in primary we've not got that luxury yet. Yeah,
it relies on somebody taking time out of their spare time, their lunch time, and we're already doing that so much anyway. So the people driving this at the minute are really passionate, and I have so much respect for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and as you say, it's kind of where that understanding, I suppose, is why it's so important, because recognizing the context those teachers are in, and kind of, as you say, sort of understanding that we know goodwill only goes so far, particularly when there's all these other pressures on staff. And then we're asking people to do something that isn't within any statutory guidance, won't necessarily be linked to their Ofsted inspections or things like that. It's a difficult ask, isn't it? And I guess kind of coming back to Sabiha's question, have you found so far in the work that you've been doing with kind of primary careers, are there some things that do make life a little bit easier, or where perhaps it's a bit of an easier sell to get people to engage with the resources, or maybe just it's a kind of quick win for teachers in the sense of how they can deliver that, and maybe gives them something else alongside the careers content as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are some really quick wins. I think first of all, it's just, again, changing that culture to say careers education in primary schools doesn't need to be this big thing. Every single day, one of my favorite bits about my job is introducing children to new bits of knowledge, new skills, and you see it written all over their faces. You sometimes have a conversation with your teaching assistant. I had this about a month ago. We were teaching a lesson on development of a fetus in the womb, and then we saw this one girl just come to life in this lesson. She was so engrossed in it, and we were kind of looking at each other like, wow, she's definitely got a passion for this, wouldn't it be great if we could get somebody like a midwife in to talk to the children about this when we do our next session, which is looking at how children develop to adults. And we did that. So that's really, really, it's really, really great and an easy thing to do, to link what we're already doing to careers. But as we addressed, it just takes somebody's time to go out and make that connection. And thankfully, I already knew a midwife who was happy to come in. But I think the other thing is balancing bringing people into schools, which is time consuming, with quick wins like resources, short videos, linking the curriculum that they're already doing to jobs. You're about to learn this in maths. Here are some careers that literally use the knowledge, the skills that you are about to learn about. It's amazing.
Yeah. And I think there's, from a kind of quick wins point of view, I think it can be that people are just aware of the context of careers. So when they're talking about things, they actually have an answer when somebody says, and this was something that we found in secondary as well, and we developed a whole series of resources at MYPATH to support this. The most common question in a math lesson is, when am I ever going to use this? That's the most common question that goes to teachers. When am I ever going to use Pythagoras? And actually, to be able to say, here's 10 jobs that use Pythagoras and how they use them is really useful. And that same, although we're talking about the difference between primary and secondary, that same principle applies to primary. And I think when you've got, we've spoke a lot about the stereotypical disengaged boys at the back of the room, all want to be footballers or YouTubers, stereotyping here, but talking sweeping statements. When you've got that group, it's really handy to be able to point out where the learning that you're engaging in is actually going to help you in the future and how it might benefit you. So I think in terms of quick wins, resources can support that, and the resources that we create, I think, would support that really well. But I actually don't think you need our resources. I think if you've got the right set of staff that have the right mentality and are prepared to do that bit of CPD, a bit of learning and understanding, they can do this quite naturally, and it can happen in conversation. You know, I'd love to get to the point where instead of just having a lesson objective on the board, you had a lesson objective and real world links or something like that, and that was part of everything that we did from early years right through to secondary and post-16 education as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of like it's the culture. I think, James, you were talking about. I'll kind of bring you back in because something else to follow up on there. But you were mentioning there about the culture earlier, and I think it links really nicely back to our last podcast with Vic Geary from We Are Futures, where she was talking about this idea of every trip having the potential to be a careers trip, and actually it's more of a mindset shift. And I was thinking about my niece recently going on a kind of trip with her primary school. They went to L'Oreal to look at how they kind of create bath products. You think it's so directly connected to what I presume was a science trip, or I may be making an assumption, but actually could have been a careers trip, and was obviously connected into, as you said, real world stuff that people find interesting. It's fostering curiosity, but also it's something that could quite easily be connected into, what do these people do? Who's responsible for making this stuff happen? So, James, I'll pass back to you there, because it looks like you're itching to come back in after James's point.
It's building on what you've just said there. I mean, that whole culture piece looks really different in primary than just secondary. And you're right, the quick wins are linking the curriculum to careers. But then there's also an acknowledgement of, when we're talking about things like careers conversations, it's really obvious in a secondary school that you've got interactions with appointments with careers advisors. We don't have that in primary school. And actually, one of the things I hate most about my job is I spend 5-6 hours a day with the same children, and it's lovely. You get to know these children so well, but then when they have maybe a problem or they want to talk about something, you tend to find they go and have those conversations with the premises officer or somebody who's on the other adults in the school, maybe somebody working in reception. And when I was early in my career, that used to really offend me. I'm like, why do they not come to me for those issues? But actually, in a primary school, everybody who works in a primary school, no matter what your role is responsible for the nurturing of that child. So it's not just one person's job. It's opening up the dance floor and being like, we all have a responsibility. So when children come and ask these questions about a job or something that they're interested in, every single person is prepared to come with an answer or just like a mentality of embracing what they're saying and validating it. Maybe it's very different.
Yeah.
I love that, because what you're saying is it takes a community to raise this sort of child, right? It's exactly that. That's the premise of what you're speaking there about. I want to ask what some may consider a controversial question, and that is
for it.
Is primary careers conversations too soon? And where do the parents fit into all of this? That's going to be my follow-up question. James, if I come to you first, too soon to start talking about careers?
You were itching to go first.
Yeah, I was
you
itching
go
to go.
first, and I'll listen.
Go on then, Jamie, go for it.
Really important, and something that me and James have spoke about from the start is any level of primary careers education should never be focused on the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? As long as we remove that question, then it isn't too early. And I think there's different ways you can pose it that are more appropriate. It might be, who do you want to be when you grow up? It might be, what problems do you want to tackle when you grow up? What kind of environments do you like? You know, there's lots of careers elements that are not directly asking the question. And I think the direct question of what do you want to be when you grow up is the wrong thing to ask a primary school student. In fact, I would argue it's the wrong thing to ask a secondary school student. It's the wrong thing to ask a post-16 level student. And if you're working in connections or somewhere and you're working with adults, National Career Service, it's still the wrong question to be asking, because I'm sat here as somebody that's built my career around lots of different things, and I love my career. I don't know whether this is me forever. I don't know whether I'm at transition. It's that whole like planned happenstance theory where people chop and change, and that's okay. Things happen, things change, things differ. Might want to move abroad or do whatever. So to ask them at a primary school age, what do you want to be? Absolutely too early. But I do think we should foster those passions for things that come forward. So James mentioned that young person that had a real interest in the development of a fetus and how that works, the biology behind that. I don't think we should say, brilliant, you should be a midwife, in the same way that we shouldn't have every student that comes to us in a secondary appointment that says, I like maths, so, well, you should be an accountant. But instead, it's about fostering that. Okay, let's explore what jobs link to this. Like, there is practical applications of the things that you love. But again, we're not exploring them because you have to choose one. We're exploring them because, actually, we just want to make it relevant. This is actually purposeful. This matters in the future. That's kind of my take, anyway.
I agree. I think, in directly answering your question, I think it's about small steps. And whilst this isn't mandated, whilst we wait for more research to be done, whilst we wait to see what the data's like from all of the phases from the Start Small Dream Big pilot that's going on around the country at the minute, we don't exactly know what primary careers is going to look like if it is mandated. That might have an element of conversations. I doubt it personally, but if it does, it's going to take a lot of people collaborating with each other. That almost that uniting of two different groups of people. So you've got teachers who are involved in this. You've got people in the career side of things, and I think we all need to work together to answer that question when it comes.
And the role of parents, because you've talked about certain stakeholders within an educational setting, so that's careers leaders, sort of thought leaders, companies, organizations such as yourself, the teachers themselves. How about parents? What's the role that parents play in this conversation?
Parents hold a significant role in this. Lots of the research that has come out actually shows that the parents are very influential on the attitudes and opinions that they have in regard to their children. So, for example, if their parent has a belief about a certain job, it's very likely that their child will hold that same belief. But the beauty of primary careers is we have a wonderful opportunity to bring parents into lessons, to events, help engage them, and maybe also educate the parents in a way as well on the same page. One thing I really love, we've got this resource called Guess My Job, and we have a video of somebody talking about their job. They haven't revealed what it is, and the children have to listen to the labour market information and look at a bingo sheet. What could it be? And we've heard lots of schools use this in different ways. Some schools do this all at the same time before break. Then all the children go out to break and talk about, oh, did you get the job, this, that, and the other. But then I've also heard times where schools have invited all of the students into assembly. They've done the Guess My Job activity, all Key Stage 2 students. And then the beauty of that is they go home and they have a conversation with their sibling at the table. Did you get the Guess My Job today? And then it starts bringing parents into those conversations, which is really subtle. And we didn't know that resource was going to be used in that way. But in answer to your question, this is just a golden opportunity to bring parents in. I love it.
Yeah,
so cool.
Definitely. And I think, as you kind of mentioned, the relationship is slightly different as well in primary school, because of course you're seeing those same kids every day. Obviously your relationship with the parents potentially kind of much closer than they might be for a secondary school teacher that has 400 kids they teach.
I also think with relation to the engagement of parents, I think there's and obviously there's a whole range of factors that could influence this, like culture, like background, parent, like all of these different things. But I think when you get to secondary, the parent is almost removed from the decision. And when you train as a CDP, and you're almost you are encouraged to go beyond, like below the iceberg, and to think about, talk with students. I talk with students all the time. Where do your parents sit in this decision? How might they influence your ideas? And if you went home and said you wanted to join the army, what would mum say at the table? What would dad say? How would they think about it? So we're kind of at secondary, we're almost encouraging thinking beyond where your parents can get to, and then supporting young people to get relevant LMI to support what they want, to demonstrate that to parents, to do those kind of things. At primary, that's a very different picture. There's still a massive engagement with parents, compared to secondary. They're still actively involved every day. You're still meeting the parents most days at the school gate. It's a much more symbiotic relationship. Whereas at secondary, it's like, okay, your kids walk to school, they come to school, we see you once a term, and we tell you if there's anything bad going on. And that's kind of, as much as I'd love to see more engagement with parents in secondary, unfortunately, that is for a lot of schools where we're at.
I think you've basically really sort of hit on just how complex, I suppose, this topic is. And we, I think, could probably be talking about this for at least another half an hour. But sadly, we are coming towards the end of the time. We always do this on the podcast. We always get to the end of it and we think we've got other episodes now already coming off the back of this. And we want to do a lot more on primary careers. So this has been a really great continuation of this conversation. Before we finish, Jamie, James, if we've got any kind of viewers or sort of listeners who've been watching or listening to the podcast and they're maybe kind of inspired to read up a little bit more on primary careers, or perhaps kind of take some of the ideas you've been talking about a little bit further in their own setting, what are maybe sort of like the top 3 tips, top 3 starting points you'd recommend?
Got it. Right, I'm going to go first. The most simple one, have a go. If you're a teacher and you're listening to this and you're unsure whether to start careers education, how you might do it, just have a go. You're not going to get it wrong. We've all got so much to learn. And I think that's just that's the main point. Start engaging.
Yeah, I think following on from that is kind of connect with people that are already in the industry. So we speak to loads of people all the time. The other week we met with John Ambrose, who runs Careers Mart, and they've got a primary version of that. We learned so much just by meeting with him. And, this is still such a new space. Nobody is considered like the GOAT. Nobody is the person that's leading this charge necessarily. So you've got to connect with people that are in the space and be willing to learn. I think that's really important. I think connect with people and follow what people are doing. We've actually got a podcast episode that's being released all around primary careers. And that one is with a lady called Rebecca Orterston. Have I got the name right? Perfect.
That's how you get the name right.
Get the name right. Rebecca Orterston, sharing how she's used like STEM activities to engage people in careers. And so I think there's lots of resources that are coming out. I know you guys are doing more stuff around primary careers. We're doing stuff around primary careers. Just watch it. Just be engaged in it. Connect with people on LinkedIn like yourselves and like us and other people. Connect, drop a message, ask a question. People are open in this space. So I think take advantage of that while it's there.
Maybe the last tip. I don't know if you've given a few tips there.
Yeah, probably have.
We've gone over our allotted tips. But the other one that is an interesting one, and this is certainly opening a can of worms for another episode, right, is if you're listening to this podcast and you're involved in an organization or a business, this is also a really unique opportunity for you to make a difference as well. So I would also encourage you to jump in on what you said, get involved, reach out to your local schools in your area and be an olive branch. See if you can help out. And that's just a wonderful thing. Got so many people.
Yeah, there's so many businesses that could really support this work in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
And as you said, it can be as simple as you said, it could be a parent. Like kind of when you watch the American shows and TV programs and the movies, isn't there always, especially if it's a movie or a show about sort of where it's about a family, where you have, don't you, the parent going in talking about what they do for a living, and usually it's the fireman, etc., and but it's that, isn't it? It's getting it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be something as simple as asking a parent to come and talk about their business, or perhaps the work that they do and what that involves. as Chris said, we are at the end of today's show. I want to say, I want to say a massive thank you to you, Jamie and James, for joining us today in today's podcast. Now, if we have viewers, now I will point out that any of the resources that have been mentioned in today's episode will be included in the notes on Spotify and in the description on YouTube. So do not panic, viewers. And if you've enjoyed today's show, then please subscribe so that you make sure that you never miss any of these episodes, and hit that like button. And if folks want to get in touch with you, Jamie and James, what's the best place for them to go so that they can access the resources that you've talked about, but also connect with you and continue the conversation beyond today's episode?
Yeah, I think if you directly want to have a conversation, we can provide our email to put in the notes. So a contact us email. Our website has loads of information on there. So if you're kind of watching it, you want to tentatively have a look at what we do, then reach out. But I think, most people in this space are contactable, and you can connect with them and you can talk to them. There's nobody that's out of reach. So beyond just speaking to me and James, there's loads of people in this community that would be really worth speaking to.
Fantastic. Great message there to end on. Of course, we're all massive LinkedIn fans here, so we'd be remiss not to say, connect with all of us on LinkedIn. As you said, people in this space, very active and generally, hopefully, as you've seen from the podcast today, very friendly and very eager to kind of share their expertise. So, that really leads us very nicely to the end of the podcast. Again, massive thank you to yourselves, Jamie and James, for joining us. Thanks to all the viewers and listeners watching or listening, wherever you may be in the world. And thank you, as always, for engaging with the show. We're going to be back in a fortnight's time. We'll see you in the career sphere. Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.